Hello and welcome, I'm Counterplay, and in this Commander Deck Tech video we will be looking at Kykar, Wind's Fury. And let's look at Kykar real quick. It's a Jeskai colored commander, 1 blue, red, white, bird wizard 3/3 flying, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, we create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, and we can sacrifice a spirit to add 1 red. I'm feeling like this is a great commander to use with the Strixhaven common card, Dragon's Approach. Now this is the real card that this whole commander deck is about. Let's read it real quick. Dragon's Approach for 3 mana, sorcery. Dragon's Approach deals 3 damage to each opponent. We may exile Dragon's Approach and 4 cards also named Dragon Approach from our graveyard. If we do, we may search our library for a dragon creature card, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle. A deck can have any number of cards named Dragon's Approach. So right off the bat, we're going to be playing a lot of benefits for either playing a lot of Dragon's Approaches, and we're going to be playing a lot of utility dragons on top of that. But first, let's go through the control cards. I have about 6 here. The first one is Blasphemous Act for 8 and a red. The spell costs 1 last for each creature on the battlefield and does 13 damage to each creature, just one of our sweepers. Next up is Chandra's Incinerator for 6 mana. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-creature damage dealt to your opponents this turn. So with 1 Dragon's Approach, this spell is going to be costing only 1 red mana. It has Trample, 6/6, and whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. So as long as we're casting our Dragon's Approaches and this is on the field, we're also going to be blasting our opponent's creatures for 3 damage for each Dragon Approach we're casting. So next up we have the Chaos Warp, just a 3 mana instant spell. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library and then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, put it on the battlefield. We're either trading out one of the major threats our opponents is using with another card in their deck. Most of the time this is totally worth it as a removal. Next up we have the Cyclonic Riff for 2 mana. Return target non-land permanent to your owner's hand, or we can overload it and hit all of our opponent's non-land permanents. And we got Generous Gift here for 2 and 1 white, instant destroying target permanent. Its controller makes a 3/3 elephant. And lastly we have the Wear and Tear. It can destroy either a target artifact or enchantment or both. So going to the next section of the deck, since we're going to be playing so many of the same card, we're going to be needing to draw a lot of cards as well as replacing the cards that we're playing. Meaning we're going to need a lot of draw cards. And I got 15 here. First off we have Amass the Components for 3 and a blue. It's a sorcery, drawing 3 cards and putting a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. Now why is this in the deck? Because of that second part of it. Whenever we draw the 3 cards, we're going to be putting one of our cards, mainly a dragon if we have it in our hand, that we really want to play with our Dragon's Approaches. So when we are trying to exile our Dragon Approaches, we're able to use the dragon that we stuff at the bottom with Amass the Components. Next up we have Archmage Emeritus for 2 and 2 blue. It's a human wizard, 2/2. As Magecraft, whenever we are casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell, we're going to be drawing a card. So this is going to allow us to draw cards on top of playing our Dragon's Approaches. Next up we have Careful Study, which is 1 blue. It says, sorcery, draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards from your hand. This is a low cost sorcery for 1 blue. We're able to draw 2 cards and discard possibly 2 Dragon's Approaches, increasing our counts in our graveyard in order to exile up to 5 at the same time and cheat out a dragon from our library. Next up we have Collected Conjuring for 2 and a blue and a red. Sorcery, exile the top 6 cards of your library. You may cast up to 2 sorcery cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from among them and put them into play without paying their mana cost. Put the exiled cards not cast this way on the bottom of its owner's library. So this will allow us to play 2 Dragon's Approaches if we want, or some other sorceries that are 3 or less that we're able to exile with it. Next up we have Compulsive Research for 3 mana, sorcery, target player draws 3 cards. Then that player discards 2 cards unless they discard a land card. Just another low cost sorcery that's able to draw multiple cards and possibly discard Dragon's Approaches. Next we have Dream Cache for 2 and a blue, draw 3 cards, put 2 cards from our hand both on top or on the bottom of our library, whichever we choose. So we're going to be putting up to 2, possibly dragons from our hand back into our library. Faceless Looting for 1 red, drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards, and it has the flashback to do it again. And just like we were looking at Careful Study, If we're going to be discarding cards, we want to be discarding Dragon's Approaches, increasing that count in our graveyard so we can cheat out on Dragon. Jeskai Will for 3, it's a sorcery. We can choose one or both if we have our commander in play. We're adding red mana for each card in our target's opponent's hand, or we're going to exile the top 3 cards of your library and play them this turn, or both with our commander in play. So this is all around great ramp card and great utility card to get more Dragon's Approaches out. Next we have Jeskai's Ascendancy, blue, red, and white enchantment. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, like our Dragon's Approaches, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn, and untap those creatures. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So we're going to be able to be looting at the same time as playing our Dragon's Approaches, possibly putting more Dragon's Approaches in the graveyard through that way, and cheating out a dragon in the same turn, hopefully. Next up we have Plea for Power, 3 and a blue. It has Will of the Council. Starting with you, each player votes for time or knowledge. If time gets more votes, we take an extra turn, but mainly we're always going to be getting the knowledge votes and drawing 3 cards from this. Next up we have Forge, Reforge the Soul for 5 mana. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws 7 cards. It's just another way to refill our hand after we're casting all of our Dragon's Approaches, and it has the effect to miracle it. Next up we have Skull Clamp. Since we're creating a lot of 1/1 spirits from our commander, we're able to clamp them and draw 2 cards from them. Solve the equation for 3 mana. We search our library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. And then shuffle. So we are able to search up another Dragon's Approach with this if we really need to, or we can get one of our wheel effects with this, which is more important. And since we're in Jeskai colors, we're also going to be including the Whirl of Thought. It's 1 in Jeskai colors enchantment. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, we're going to be drawing a card. So at the same time as playing our Dragon's Approaches, we're going to be filling up our hand again by drawing those cards back. And lastly, we have Windfall for 2 and a blue. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards in the player is discarded this way. So this is just another way to wheel and draw a new hand after we've played all of our Dragon's Approaches. Next category, I have our reducers in 1 copy spell. First off, we have the Cloud Key, which is a 3 mana artifact. As Cloud Key comes into play, choose artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Spells of the chosen type cost 1 less to play. Obviously, we're going to be picking sorcery, making our Dragon's Approaches and other sorceries cost 1 less. Next, we have Council of the Absolute, 2 a white and a blue. Human Advisor, it's a 2/4. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we're going to be naming a card other than a creature or land card. Your opponents can't cast cards with the chosen name, but the spell we choose that we cast costs 2 colorless less to cast, making our Dragon's Approaches cost only 1 red mana. Also, next up we have the Locket of Yesterdays. For 1 generic, it's an artifact. Spells you play cost 1 colorless less to play for each card with the same name as that spell in your graveyard. So multiple cards of the Dragon's Approach in our graveyard is going to make the next ones we cast even less. Pyromancer Ascension. This is a 1 and a red enchantment. It's only probably going to be able to be played in EDH in this deck, because whenever we cast an instance or sorcery spell that has the same name as a card in your graveyard, you may put a quest counter on Pyromancer's Ascension. So we have to have multiple copies of instants and sorceries. And whenever we do put a counter, up to 2 counters on it, and we cast an instance and sorcery with Pyromancer while it has the 2 counters on it, we may copy that spell and then choose new targets for the copies. So this is just an easy copy effect. The more Dragon's Approaches we're able to cast and put out, we're able to copy with it. Last up we have the Ruby Medallion for 2. It's an artifact. Red spells we cast cost 1 colorless less. And then of course we have the Dragon's Approaches. I have 28 in this deck for now. You can kind of change it around for yourself and find the right number for you, but I think the more Dragon's Approaches, obviously, the better. And here's our ramp artifact package here. We have Arcane Signet for 2, taps for any color of our commander. Spellweaver Helix for 3 mana. It's a imprint card. Whenever it comes into play, you may remove 2 target sorcery cards in a single graveyard from the game. When a card is played, if it has the same name as one of the imprinted sorcery cards, you may cast the other without paying its mana cost and choosing new targets. But this is going to be good. If we want to, we can exile 2 Dragon's Approaches with it by doubling up our Dragon's Approach every time we cast it with this out. Or we can exile another of our sorceries, such as either Windfall, Reforge the Soul, Jeskai Will, just any of our other sorceries with it in order to draw cards at the same time as casting the Dragon's Approach. And then the other two artifacts here is the Talisman of Conviction and the Talisman of Creativity, both tapping for red and white and red and blue respectively. Then I'll skip the lands for now, and then we'll go to the big section of our dragons that matters the most. We only have 6 here, but they're all good. First off, let's go through the Backdraft Hellkite. For 5 mana, it's a flying 4/4 dragon. Whenever it attacks, each instance and sorcery in our graveyard gains flashback until end of turn, if the flashback cost is equal to their mana cost. So if we cast it, it's going to be exiled, but we get another chance at a lot of these other great utility instance and sorcery spells that we have in the deck as well. Next up I have the Bellfire Dragon for 7 mana. It's a 6/6 flying dragon. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls as well. So this is another great dragon we can bring out to help sweep the board on our opponent's creatures. Next up we have Dragon Mates for 7. It's a 5/5 flying. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, each player is going to discard their hand and draw 7 cards. Just another dragon that will allow us to draw a massive amount. Speaking of drawing a massive amount, we have the Nullspine Dragon next. For 7 mana, it's a 7/5 flying. Whenever Nullspine Dragon comes into play, you may discard your hand and draw cards equal to the damage dealt to target opponent this turn. So if we're able to do either 3, 6, 9, however many Dragon's Approaches we can cast earlier in this turn and bring this out, we're going to be drawing all those cards that we've dealt damage to one player. So this is going to be a massive draw and a great tutor for our Dragon's Approaches. Next up we have Niv Mizzet Perun for 3 blue and 3 red. The spell cannot be countered. It's a 5/5 flying dragon, and whenever we draw a card it deals 1 damage to any target, but whenever a player casts an instance or sorcery spell, we may draw a card. Just another way when we're playing our instants and sorceries, we're going to be drawing a card at the same time. And lastly, the dragons. To end the dragon series, we got the 5 mana Boros, 5 red and white. It's a 5/5 flying vigilant haste dragon, and whenever Velomachus Lorehold attacks, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with a mana value less than or equal to its power among them, and without paying its mana cost. Put the rest of the back on the bottom of our library in a random order. So this is going to allow us to play an additional Dragon's Approach when it attacks as well. And just to recap, a lot of these lands are just mana fixing lands. I don't really have any really good utility lands to really take note of, but all in all, this deck is all based around obviously the Dragon's Approach and how many we can cast each turn and which dragons we're going to be bringing out with them. You may notice I don't have the Thrumming Stone in this deck list. I think Thrumming Stone is a great card, especially if you're using multiple copies of the same card through the ripple effect, but I just rather have more fun by not playing it, because what happens when you play Thrumming Stone is that you're going to be cycling through a lot of your deck and you're just going to be rippling out Dragon's Approaches and pretty much either going to end the whole game in that turn that you ripple, or you just fizzle out and you just focus on trying to ripple the next turn. It's kind of boring to me, but it is an awesome card and this deck would totally use it if you want to use it. So here's a look at the mana curve of this deck. Obviously we have a major spike in our 3 mana value cards due to all the Dragon's Approaches we're using, but also here's a color pan out of what we have in the deck. 11% of it is white, 23% of the symbols are blue, and 71% is red. Like I was saying, we aren't using a Thrumming Stone in this deck. I just think it cuts out on a lot of fun. We could have more than just not including it, and it is including the salty card from EDH Rec, Cyclonic Riff. And that wraps it up for this Commander Deck Tech video. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment below on what you think of the deck, and consider subscribing for more Commander Deck Techs in the future. And as always, have fun.